Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today it is the 24th of April. Today we're looking mainly at the consequences of the Russian breakthrough at Ocheretyne. And so we're going to take a deeper dive into the various parts of the northern Avdiivka front and looking at where the Russians have progressed. Starting off with Semenivka. This video came out today. It's a video showing the Ukrainian drones dropping grenades onto Russian infantry as they were occupying houses in the more central or northern parts of the village, which really is comprised of one main road. And so the Russians, the pace of their advance over here has been relatively slow due to the protracted Ukrainian resistance. Heavy drone coverage has also been a problem for the Russians, and so they've tried to take it slowly because, as you can see, every couple hundred meters we have a video of Ukrainian drones responding, and now we have confirmation of a 200-meter Russian advance. So the only question left is whether there are Ukrainian soldiers located in this narrow strip of land in northern Semenivka or in these trenches a bit to the west. If not, then Semenivka is now fully cleared of a Ukrainian presence, which means the Ukrainians on their current line of defense. And when I'm talking about their line of defense, I'm talking about this relatively straight vertical line that we see running along the line of contact. They really don't have any cover to utilize in terms of houses that could be used or basements, because Semenivka was really their last option for doing so. And so now all of the Ukrainian forward positions are basically just in open fields, albeit they are in heights. Basically, this area that I'm going over in blue, it is located on a local ridge which overlooks the Drina River Valley, where the Ukrainians previously had their line, but over there at least they had the afforded protection from houses, and so now the Ukrainians, most of them at least in this line, which consists of several hundred soldiers, I'd say, are located in various trenches and in trees. Now let's look at Ocheretyne, because the situation here has developed very quickly over the past 2 days. On the 23rd of April, the Russians already had control of around 40% of the town, which primarily was centered around control of the southern section, and also some areas just to the north of the rail line, looking something like this. And the Ukrainians by this point already made the decision to withdraw. They really didn't have much of a choice because, as I said before, the various factors: being caught by surprise, being extremely fatigued, not being able to organize a successful counterattack. And so despite Ocheretyne having so many valuable positions, including in apartment buildings located in the northeastern section of the town, and also various trenches that are located on the town's perimeter, they had to withdraw from them as well. And so you had a dispersion of the Ukrainians that were located at the central hub. Some moved northwards to Arkhangelsk, and you could see on my mapping, I tried to be accurate with, which units are actually located around here. To my knowledge, it appears that the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade is the main Ukrainian unit that's stationed on this northern section just to the north of Ocheretyne. And you also have a presence generally around the town of the 100th Mechanized Brigade. This is a very interesting unit because it was originally the 100th Volyn Territorial Defense Brigade. It was, of course, newly formed with the beginning of the war. It was mainly serving around Krasnohorivka and Kremina, which is, a lower intensity part of the front line. Eventually, on March 30th, it was changed from a territorial defense unit to an actual mechanized brigade, which is a part of the Ukrainian ground forces. And so its higher up command was transferred to this other section of the wider military. And so now it's been given this mechanized label. In terms of the naming, it doesn't really change much, but in terms of who gives them orders, that is a change. And so regardless, it is still likely lower when it comes to the quality of the soldiers and the actual equipment, but nonetheless, it means that now they've been moved to this more important part of the front line, and this has been over the past few weeks, you could say. And so now they've been moved in. Deep State claims that they repelled a Russian attack, but based on Deep State's own mapping, all we can see is that the Russians have advanced over the past 2 days in this area. But just know that they were forced to move in this unit to help make up for the infantry shortages that we see basically causing massive issues for every single Ukrainian brigade in this region. Of course, we have the 115th Mechanized Brigade, which also had its two individual battalions that were fighting within Ocheretyne that has also now been moved likely northwards or northeastwards. And then you have the 47th Mechanized Brigade a bit to the west, along with the Scala Assault Battalion. It was moved up from a drone unit to an assault battalion, so it was likely given additional supplies because they performed well on the battlefield as a drone unit, so I need to change their naming on the map. But in any case, that should give you an idea of where the Ukrainians have dispersed now. They can no longer use Ocheretyne as a central node. And by the 24th of April, the Russian forces had control of over 60% of the town. Now it's probably closer to 70 following new mapping from deep states. So now you could see, based on that new change, that the Russian forces are within this waterworks facility. They're very close to actually entering this northeastern apartment district, which would be important because it would give them control of these blocks that could overlook the valley on which the Ukrainians that just retreated are currently located in Arkhangelsk. This area is very important just given the fact that a lot of Ukrainians have retreated in this direction. There's plenty of trenches. It is low lying. It could become a larger target given what's going on around Novokalynove. But we'll look at that later in the video. And so we also have the Russian forces in much of the residential area. We also have them in this bricks facility and advancing through the rail line. So now the Russians have access to this very important road, which they're definitely going to be moving their various armored assets through to get a spearhead forming, which could also act as the northern flank to attack the current Ukrainian front line, which I guess we can measure with the ruler. It's like about 7 kilometer front line, which is basically holding from the outskirts of Berdychi to Umanske. And speaking of Berdychi, due to the Russian advances that have deepened and due to the reinforcements that have been moved in and due to the capture of Novobakhmutivka, the Russian forces are now in a much stronger position around Berdychi because the Ukrainian forces that are holding the line just to the west of Berdychi in the various tree lines, they are now exposed. They have really are facing from the north a significant Russian presence several kilometers northwards, and their routes to escape are extremely difficult. It could still be done. So the Ukrainian infantry, they are likely, if they've not already, are in the process of withdrawing from these various tree lines near Berdychi, and that of course will occur under heavy fire through open fields and no really paved roads to go through to get out. And as a result, the Russian forces have also made additional gains near the cemetery area. And speaking of Novobakhmutivka, it was the really obvious result of the capture of Ocheretyne that Novobakhmutivka would be next, simply because the Ukrainians, they organized two counterattacks involving the 47th Mechanized Brigade and 115th Brigade, and both of them were a failure in terms of pushing back the Russians. In fact, the Russians, they turned the tables and continued their push unabated. And so clearly, whatever garrison was stationed around Novobakhmutivka, which is mainly from the Scala battalion, and again, there's a lot of questions about whether they have the necessary manpower as a drone unit that was then turned into a battalion. And so Novobakhmutivka was really exposed given the fact that the Russians had such a strong presence and now have an even stronger presence within these central heights of Ocheretyne. And so the Ukrainians were actually exposed and had to withdraw from the lower elevation of Novobakhmutivka to another rather low-lying town, Solovyove. And now there's initial information coming from the Russian side of a Ukrainian withdrawal from this town over here as well. I cannot verify that, but we do know for sure that the 15th Brigade, the 15th Motor Rifle Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces, was involved in the capture of this village. They now have a video of them raising their flag. I don't know if it was geolocated yet, but that should be the confirmation, especially since tonight, 24th of April already, Deep State reported on the capture of the town by the Russians, which gives them this very clear path along this road to take over Solovyove in the coming days. And it will be interesting to see what happens in this part of the front line because Now I'm going to talk about the bigger picture for a second. When you look at this line, the Ukrainian current positions that are near the Duna River, they are not sustainable due to the fact that the Russians are now pressing and are solidifying control over the salient, over the bulge that they've created over here, that now puts a massive mark on the Ukrainian forces located to the south. They will be fired upon not just from Ocheretyne, but also, of course, from Avdiivka, from all the heights that the Russians have under their control. And the Ukrainians have very little escape routes. Of course, you always can use the open fields, and the Ukrainians did that when they were retreating from Avdiivka, which was an even more difficult situation. But nonetheless, there are not many paved roads. Really, the only main route that the Ukrainians are using is from Simonivka to Novokalynove Perisha, and there may be a few other ones like from Berdychi to Novokalynove, but for the most part, it's through open fields. Small Ukrainian infantry groups that could initiate this withdrawal, and we don't even know if they're doing it already. And the longer that goes by, the more the Russians are prepared, the more they are firing towards the Ukrainians that are still on the line of contact, the more it becomes difficult to withdraw the Ukrainian forces that are still resisting in an organized fashion. And so eventually the Russian gains to the north will force the Ukrainians to withdraw several kilometers westwards, let's say 5-6 kilometers westwards. And the new line, the new natural line, just based on where the towns are located, is along this road that connects Umanske to Novokalynove Perisha and then to Novokalynove. And then here's the problem. Solovyove should be the natural connector between this town of Pokrovsk and the north. But if the Russian forces are already on the path to capturing it and there aren't sufficient Ukrainian reinforcements that are pushing back in this region, then this new Ukrainian line that has not even been consolidated, has not even been solidified yet, is already in danger. And the Russians are likely thinking about this, and it would be good from their perspective to already push forward and get rid of this fallback option for the Ukrainians, which if, of course, it's bad to withdraw 6 kilometers, but the worst case scenario is, of course, much worse, which would be withdrawing all the way back 10 kilometers to the Volkhov River. And definitely, given the way that things are going, the Russian forces grouping over here in Ocheretyne makes it inevitable that sooner or later the Ukrainians will have to withdraw to the trenches located to the west of Volkhov River, which is not, again, the end of the world because those positions also have their own heights and it's a wide river in certain areas. Other areas it's very narrow. But it is, of course, a loss which allows the Russian forces to strengthen their positions in Avdiivka and create an even larger bulge on the way to Pokrovsk, move artillery closer. And looking forward, it's not just the western side of the Avdiivka sector that is in danger. It's also the northern side around Arkhangelsk, as I said, because again, this town is located on rather low elevation. Its supply situation is not that good, and we'll talk about that more with Novokalynove. And it is currently being, at the very least, attacked and bombarded, not directly attacked, but we're going to have to wait and see because when we look at the situation around Novokalynove, Deep State, as of the 24th, in the early morning, they reported that the Russian forces have now physically cut off this road which connects between the center of Kramik and Novokalynove to the H20 highway. This is a very important highway. It's supposed to be a pretty well tended to road, one that the Ukrainians have relied on for a while. And you could see this key junction that they utilize to then make that turn and enter into these two villages, which serve as this forward hub that is holding the front line and preventing the eastern flank of Arkhangelsk from being put into harm's way, as you can see over here. And that's what I was really getting at. And the flanks of this village will be extremely exposed with the fall of Novokalynove and Kramik sometime in the future. And so just looking again at the supply situation for Kramik, you could see that there are, of course, some open fields that could be utilized. But again, given how close those routes are to the line of contact, they will be under very heavy fire from the Russians. And again, the rotations, the evacuations are all made much more difficult. And so it just puts the Ukrainians in a difficult situation where they could be forced out eventually. And then it also means that a lot of these trenches that they built near these towns where they expected not to be flanked from both sides. They expected to have a head-on fight against the Russians, so they built these trenches over here. They will also become superfluous if the Ukrainians are forced to withdraw from the broader area. Just to get a quick refresher on the Ukrainian troop composition in the region, we have the 127th Battalion of the 112th Kiev Territorial Defense Brigade. Again, you're seeing a lot of territorial defense units stationed in really the most critical parts of one of the most critical sections of the entire front line. And so seeing such a high amount of TDF units or formerly TDF units, it really does raise a lot of questions about the availability or the capabilities of the other mechanized units. Like, shouldn't they be moved in first in such a key area? But no, in an area like Karamik, you have this particular battalion that's defending over here, and then you have nearby several independent battalions or rifle battalions as well, as you can see over here. And then there's a question about the availability of the 1st Tank Brigade and the 23rd Mechanized Brigade. So the 1st Tank Brigade, it has its responsibility split across multiple sectors. As we know, they have other elements around Velika Novosilka and some other parts of the front, but they have probably at least one battalion stationed around here. And there are questions being raised about whether they were rotated out from the front line over the past few weeks or whether they're still fighting. That's something that we don't have enough information about. And then there's a 23rd Mechanized Brigade, another unit that was, I believe, slated for the summer counteroffensive last year. And then it was moved a couple of months ago to hold the northern flank of Avdiivka. And so seeing them being out of the fray for a couple of weeks is very interesting, especially at a critical time. So it may be that they were actually involved in a lot of these rotations at the same time that there were reports coming out that the 47th Mechanized Brigade was involved in troop rotations. And all of this combination of both rotations and fatigue at the same time, it just created the perfect storm for the Russian forces to take advantage and tap into this breakthrough. Around Krasnohorivka, there's a lot of unconfirmed information, and so I've not adjusted the map to reflect those rumors because the current rumors are that there are Russian forces that are storming the western sections of the Ukrainian line based around the industrial zone in the central parts of Krasnohorivka. You could see that line marked over here in blue. I still have the Ukrainians as in full control of it. But you could see yesterday we had the videos of the 238th Artillery Brigade shelling the industrial zone with the Tulipan self-propelled mortar or heavy mortar fire. And they were targeting the various Ukrainian positions over here. And now we're getting information about Russian assaults, which occurred today, or it would be on the 23rd. And you actually had Ukrainian sources mentioning these armored assaults occurring in southern Krasnohorivka and showing a video of the Russians towing away one of their turtle tanks, which it actually ran over a mine and was damaged. And so now it's being moved to Donetsk where they're going to try to repair it. But nonetheless, that should give you an idea of the fact that the Russians are now actively assaulting here, and over the past week they've gradually been expanding control of the gray zone because there was a massive gray zone in between the rail line and the industrial zone following the turtle tanks efforts of dismounting troops all across this gray zone and reaching all the way to industrial zone. And so over the past few days you've had Russian infantry dismounting from, again, sometimes BMPs, sometimes other vehicles, and gradually solidifying control over houses and other facilities located in southern Krasnohorivka. So we saw an advance of the Russian forces through these houses and through this particular